Yep, yeah, go right ahead.
You good?
Yep. We're all good? Anyone else? Okay. Welcome this morning. My name is Mike Johnson. I'm an information officer assigned to the East Troublesome Fire. We're going to do similar to what we did yesterday for the media that was involved, or that came yesterday. We'll give a fire update from the incident commander, Noel Livingston. And that is, for those of you that need the spelling, it's Noel, N-O-E-L, last name is Livingston, L-I-V-I-N-G-S-T-O-N. Did I get that right, Noel?
Yep,
and then we have the sheriff speak, and that's Brett Schrotlin, B-R-E-T-T, last name Schrotlin, S-C-H-R-O-E-T-L-I-N. And then we'll have a final update from the county manager for Grand County, Kate McIntyre, and that's K-A-T-E, McIntyre, M-C-I-N-T-I-R-E. We'll save questions till after all three presenters have spoken, and we will begin with our incident commander, Noel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate you tuning in this morning for an update and a chance to answer questions. Noel Livingston, Incident Commander for Pacific Northwest Team 3. This is our second day in command of the two incidents, Williams Fork and East Troublesome. I'll give you an update on both. Let me start with East Troublesome. Obviously, the more significant of the incidents currently given fire behavior and impact to communities and residents locally. Yesterday was another very active day for us on East Troublesome. Fire activity continued across the north flank of the incident, the east flank of the incident, and the southern flanks of the incident. The only area really that was relatively quiet was where we have containment on the western flank of the East Troublesome Fire from days past. So that was the good news. In terms of what that activity meant to us, maybe I'll go around the map just a little bit, kind of show you what that means, and I'm going to move the flag here just briefly so I can get there. Got it. Thank you. So as I mentioned, north side of the fire, what we saw was active flanking, crown fire activity in timber stands, heavy bug kill, heavy fuels in that area. We saw significant growth pretty much up to the county line as the fire moved north. Primary fire spread being to the east, but as it flanked, it continued to grind to the north. So very active, and this put up a lot of the smoke that was visible on portions of the fire, particularly through the afternoon, and the large columns that were visible, particularly from the south. On the east side of the fire, overnight the night before, we did get a spot fire established in the Woo Mountain area on the east side of the Continental Divide. That showed up yesterday morning on infrared, and then as the morning progressed and we were able to actually get some eyes on it, we realized the significance of that fire. That fire established itself well on Woo Mountain yesterday, got about a mile fire head on it, and was actively spreading downslope toward Estes Park. The result of that were the evacuation levels that went into place in Estes Park yesterday morning and afternoon, and then close coordination with the incident management team at Cameron Peak to ensure that we had responders to be able to get in front of this fire coming in from obviously the other side of the Rocky Mountain crest. A whole different access issue, a whole different communication issue. So hats off to the incident management team that was at Cameron Peak to come in and assist as necessary, given the potential for this fire movement down toward Estes Park. Now, fortunately, the cold front that caused problems for us yesterday was a benefit on the other side of the crest, in that as that cold front came through on this east side, it resulted in a significant drop in temperatures, humidity's coming way up, and the result was the fire dropped down to the ground and really checked itself up and did not move down into the community yesterday afternoon. So great news on that side of the hill. Good coordination between the two teams, and we had things in place had we had a fire moving down into the community. That potential still exists, but at least for right now, has slowed to this point. Coming on around the fire, on the other primary area of concern, which is really Grand Lake to Granby to Hot Sulphur Springs. Very active fire spread continued yesterday with the hot, dry conditions and high winds that we experienced throughout the day. That was forecast, and it came to pass. We had resources working throughout this area to protect communities and homes and infrastructure throughout that zone, and that's where our effort really was focused yesterday. It was a very busy day. It was a really tough day for the firefighter, and will continue to be to some degree today. But that was the focus. We didn't see a lot of additional growth, in large part because of the fire resources that were there, and in part because of the fuel change that occurred from Grand Lake back down to Granby. But we did continue to see, obviously, active fire spread. Across the bottom of the fire, I call the southern flank of the fire, we continued to see, and we're concerned about continued fire growth south toward Granby yesterday. And again, we'll be focused on that again today. Had some containment actions taking place in this area to try to check that fire spread, as well as further to the west toward Hot Sulphur Springs above the Highway 40 corridor, where we're working dozer lines and engines, providing structure protection to the isolated structures there, and working to get containment in this area to prevent the fire from crossing Highway 40 or threatening Hot Sulphur Springs. So that was our focus yesterday. I'll say today is a repeat of those efforts. That's where our focus is going to be again today. Grand Lake, Granby, getting a check on the southern side of the fire, and then obviously keeping an eye on this piece of fire that's perched above Estes Park. One of the changes in how we're managing this incident that occurred actually yesterday afternoon informally and this morning formally is we've now zoned the fire, the Rocky Mountain Crest being the zone break. The area to the east of the crest will be known as the Thompson Zone, and will be managed by the Cameron Peak Incident Management Team, Rocky Mountain team that's off that side. So they will manage this piece of fire from the east side of the crest, which makes a lot of sense from an access and egress and communication perspective, and certainly direct access to the community. On the west side of the fire, from the Rocky Mountain Crest west, will be known as the Grand Zone of the East Troublesome Fire, and will be continued to be managed by Pacific Northwest Team 3. So a little bit of a management change going on there. All good stuff, and will work well for us. That's really the trip around the East Troublesome Fire. I will mention Williams Fork, which we continue to manage as well, which is to the south of us. A relatively quiet day on the Williams Fork fire. There was some fire activity in the very northwest corner, what we call a spot fire, in an area that we ultimately may need to do some burning operations on if weather permits and or fire behavior forces us to do. But basically we're providing support to that with aviation and just keeping an eye on it, and for the most part good shape there. A couple other things to mention in terms of fire update. One I want to hit on is resource statusing. We've had requests in for additional resources to support our activities for the last couple of days, and those have been getting filled. I really want hats off to the state system that's allowing us to bring in structure resources to provide for the structure protection that we're needing to do throughout the corridor from Grand Lake to Granby. We're also receiving a number of wildland resources, primarily engines in both cases, from the federal and state wildland agencies, again, to support that effort. So a lot of resources came in night before last, a lot came in throughout the day yesterday, and we're anticipating additional resources coming in today. Our numbers right now, we're up to about 730 personnel, which is up significantly from where we were 2 days ago, and is a great thing to see. We are also working with the Colorado National Guard. The governor made some resources available to us there, and we're working to figure out what we can use and integrate into our operations effectively. So we're having that communication with the state. So I'm pleased with where we stand priority-wise. Within the state system, we are the #1 priority fire within our area command system, and so we are getting the resources that become available to us that we have requests in for. So that's a brief update on the fire. I think with that, I'd like to introduce the sheriff to give you an update on the rest of the system here. So, Brett, all yours.
Thanks, sir. Good morning, everyone. Brett Schroetland, Grand County Sheriff. So over the last few days, we talked a lot about evacuations, and I think all those remain in place. It's super important that we have a large evacuation zone here that covers the northern part of Grand County. We also have some pre-evacuation zones that were put into place just based on the erratic fire conditions that we saw the last couple days. As the incident commander spoke about, significant growth, wind issues, and things like that. Key note that I need to make first and foremost before we move into other things is the town of Granby itself is in pre-evacuation status only. It's not actually in evacuation status. That was put into place yesterday morning, just to reiterate that the town of Granby is in pre-evacuation status. Obviously, if somebody chooses to leave, that's their choice in their best interest. But right now, we're getting a lot of rumor mills floating around out there as far as the actual town status of the town of Granby. And so the town status is that it is in pre-evacuation status. There's a little bit of outlying areas to the north of Granby that are under evacuation order, but those are kind of more into the county. So as far as evacuations, those are going to continue in place for the foreseeable future. There's really not a good time at this point to even really discuss when we're going to release those. So we'll evaluate those on a day-to-day basis as things move forward. What I want to do and talk about is what we're seeing in the area. So just as I walked into this meeting, crews were still up there working on life safety, working on structure protection. It's a large area. It spans a large part of our county, the 125 corridor, the Highway 34 corridor, the Grand Lake area, and it's really too early at this point to give a true assessment of exactly what we have in there. The county manager and I were speaking about that this morning quite a bit. I spoke with the governor about that this morning. It's very, very tough to get an assessment. And literally as I hear radio traffic as I'm coming in here from my crews in the field, an area that we thought was pretty good the other day, we're now seeing fire in. And so fires close to houses, fires close to our roadways. I really want to make that message really as a primary message to our community is that we're not withholding information. We're not trying to delay information getting out there. We don't know. I've been through many of these areas up in there, and things change every pass-through that I go. And so it's super important that I provide the most accurate, timely, correct information I can to you folks. But I honestly don't know a lot of these areas. And once we get a chance to actually get in there, let our firefighting crews actually stabilize some of these houses, stabilize some of these egress and ingress routes, and actually get an interpretation, we'll be able to have some better understanding. But like I said, 10 o'clock on a couple mornings afterwards from our big fire front, we're still having issues. Propane tanks are still venting off. There's a lot of safety risk up in there. And so our crews, yesterday got pulled from the field when we had some issues over Highway 34. And so I just want to make sure that people understand that we're working for the community. We're working hard to figure out the information. I know people are scared. I spoke with a gentleman at my last meeting, and I could see the tear and the fear in his eyes, and I can't give him the answers until I actually know the answers myself. And so we're working on those. I think, obviously we're going to have these updates daily for the next couple days probably, and we can get that information out when the time is right. But let our citizens know that we're working for them. I think that's a super important message from the local level. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to pass it back to the team. I'm happy to take any questions, but thanks for your patience, thanks for your cooperation, and your county and partners are working for you.
And then up next is Kate McIntyre.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate McIntyre. I'm the Grand County Manager, and I just want to tell you all that the last few days have been absolutely some of the toughest days that I've had, but to see everyone coming together and working together around this disaster in our community is really, truly humbling. We are all working so hard to make sure that we're getting all the information that we can out to the community, really all the information that we have. Like the sheriff said, there's just a lot that we don't have right now. I can tell you that if you have resources available, we're really trying to coordinate all of those through our Grand County Emergency Operations Center. We have a lot of folks that are coming in. We've got state support that has been here for quite a while now, helping us with some of our other fire in the community, and they have been also calling on their resources. And so right now, it's more important than ever that as a community we stay coordinated, keeping the lines of communication open and having things related to all of our evacuees and our sheltering locations within the community and in our surrounding communities coordinated through our Emergency Operations Center. So the way that you can get linked in to that group of people, our incident management team that's operating out of our Emergency Operations Center, is to go to INCIWeb, which is INCIWeb, web.gov, and resources can be really coordinated through that effort. I also want to tell you today that I am personally evacuated, so to be the county manager, as well as being evacuated from my home and not having information about whether or not it's still standing, I just want you to know that there are many of us on the team that are in that situation. And so not only do we have sympathy for you, we are right there with you, and we know that it's important for you to have the information as soon as we have it. So I just want to thank all of the support. It's really pouring in. I've had so many people contact me. So keep the good thoughts, good energy. I'm wearing yellow today. That's the color of hope, and that's what we need to have right now. So thank you all. We are grand. We are together. We are grand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Appreciate that. Well, let's go with, first of all, we'll do some questions, and we'll start with Noel, if you don't mind coming up, and we'll just do the fire-related questions, and then we'll move on to the others. Is that okay? So, do we have any questions for Noel?
Yes, I have a question for Noel. Can the 730 personnel that you mentioned, is that specifically on the East Troublesome Fire? And can you also give an approximate acreage or square miles that that area represents?
Certainly will. I should have hit the acreage earlier. So the 730 roughly personnel are available to both fires. 725 of them are assigned to East Troublesome. So we're able to move them back and forth certainly between the two incidents, but that's where the work is right now, where the priority is. 170,000 acres roughly is the overall acreage of East Troublesome. That was a growth of about 45,000 acres yesterday. So I should have mentioned that. Good question. I appreciate that. A very active fire growth day yesterday. A lot of that occurred on that northern flank that I mentioned as the fire continued to spread to the north. Some on the eastern flank, most to the north.
That answered my question.
Okay.
Did you compare the weather today to the weather yesterday?
You bet. So we are starting to see a relief in the weather. So yesterday, certainly the weather conditions we were facing were, again, low relative humidities that had carried over from the previous day. Relatively warm temperatures for this time of year, and high winds, and then ultimately a cold front passage with very high winds and a wind shift around from the northwest blowing to the southeast. Today we're seeing higher relative humidities up into more seasonal conditions. Temperatures are down about 10 degrees, maybe a little bit more this morning, feeling the weather coming in this morning, and the winds have subsided somewhat. We're not seeing the cold front passage winds, although winds are forecast to be higher this afternoon than what we're experiencing right now. Relatively calm currently. So abatement in some of that extreme weather conditions, although we still are looking at some red flag conditions again today with the humidities and winds that we're forecasted.
Have there been any injuries among firefighters or first responders?
We've had some minor injuries. We did have one minor injury yesterday, but nothing significant at this point. And that to some degree goes with the terrain in terms of this is hard, dangerous work. But no burn injuries, typical injuries associated with the kind of work we're doing.
Do you know if there's been any with residents or civilians?
I can't answer that question. I'm not aware of that. Be a question for the sheriff. Other questions?
That fire jumped into the hot spot over that kind of terrain on the divide.
Can you repeat?
Repeat the question a little bit louder.
How unique is that the hot spot jumping that kind of terrain on the divide there and jumping into the park?
I'd say it certainly can happen with the wind events that were occurring in the fire intensity. For a spot fire to carry a mile to two is not that common, although in general this fire was moving with spotting up to a mile as a fairly common mechanism. This was a little further than that. Certainly went over some very bare ground, bare rock above timberline. We were hoping that wouldn't occur. It's not unheard of. How often that happens across the top of the Rockies, I can't say.
As far as Granby goes, what's the danger to residents living in the town of Granby, and what situations or weather changes should they look out for as signs that things could get worse?
Certainly. So the risk to Granby would be fire spread, currently fire spread from primarily the north or northwest down toward the community in these lighter fuels. the advantage to the position of Granby is that, again, it is in lighter fuels. While fire can move relatively rapidly through light fuels, it's also relatively easy to suppress. It's also easier terrain to get into, so dozers are effective. We can get engine crews into the road systems and access the community pretty readily. So I would say Granby is defensible. It's not, you know, in heavy timber. It's not in areas in terrain where you can't get to. It's just the opposite. So that's a good thing for us. Certainly, we want to keep an eye on active fire spread that would be moving from the north toward Granby, and ask the citizens to be aware of that. But I feel a high degree of confidence that we would be effective if we have to get to that point. In the meantime, our efforts are to get a containment line between the fire and Granby and get a solid fire edge burned back down to that line so that we don't have to fight fire near the community.
Last question. Moving up to Grand Lake, I was listening to the scanner Wednesday night into Thursday morning, and there were just some really harrowing moments on that, and just really what it sounded like is some real heroism in there. I was going to see if you could talk about the intensity of the firefight in the Grand Lake area and what's still happening within that kind of right along the lake, and then that Highway 34 corridor where there are so many structures.
Could you summarize that question
for the audience? So the question is, what does the firefight look like? What is the fire activity, and what does the suppression response look like in the Grand Lake area? And that it had been heard that was an intense effort that was going on. And the answer is yes, it was, and it still is. We're not out of the woods in the Grand Lake area or anywhere along the lake and coming back down to Lake Granby. Really, this whole corridor is more heavily fueled, timbered in a number of areas, so the fire intensity is higher. The fire spread has slowed down with the conditions we're seeing today, and so that's definitely a benefit to the firefighter in terms of being able to get in and deal with protecting individual structures. As I mentioned yesterday, I didn't go into it so much today, but our primary focus today remains ensuring the evacuations are supported with the sheriff's office, so that law enforcement is able to get in if they need to and get people out if we need to. Second objective is protection of the communities, and then the third is the point protection of residents that may be out in the urban interface. So that's really where we're focused, and some of those efforts are going to be, we're going to be facing aggressive fire behavior, and engaging will be difficult in places. We are seeing some opportunity today to also take some containment actions, as I mentioned, to take fire spread out of play toward particularly the community of Granby, which we actually started yesterday and last night. So that's a positive.
Can you just repeat the acreage you think that you estimated is possibly
As of late yesterday afternoon, the acreage was around 170,000 acres. We did see some additional growth last night. We'll be updating that acreage this morning as those numbers come in.
Any additional questions for the incident commander? Okay, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. And now we'll take questions for Brett.
Sheriff, are you able to confirm that there were 2 fatalities in Grand Lake as a result of this fire?
No, I cannot. We're working with some family members on some missing subjects, but we're not able to confirm any information at this time.
Do you know how many people are still missing, or that the Grand Lake Sheriff's Office has received missing persons reports for?
So that list kind of varies. It's been very, very, very low. But what happens is we get calls in our dispatch center that somebody reports a family member missing, and then it actually turns out that they've been found at a different evacuation center or family or friend or something like that. And so that list is very, very small. We've probably had kind of a combination of 5 overall that have kind of come and gone, and we just work through those on a case-by-case basis.
Do you have any ETA for a damage assessment, or any idea when you guys might be able to get in and give some of these families closure?
So I addressed that a little bit earlier, but the key to that is still working on life safety, still working on that structure protection area in there, and letting these fire crews stabilize this large mass area that we have. And as soon as we can get in there, we will. If we can get some answers, little here and there type things, we're working on that as we can. But until we can actually get a full assessment in there, it really relies on them securing this stuff in there, making sure that some of these risks are in there before we actually get our teams in there to assess it.
So Sheriff, if there is a family member who's saying publicly that two of their family members are dead, that's something that you just cannot speak to at this time?
That is correct. I would refer you back to the family for any information you're following on that.
Sheriff, can you talk about active evacuations? I just heard him saying that there may be some folks who are still inside. Do you have any idea how many people are trying to get out and need law enforcement support to get out?
I understand your question. I think I need to clarify it a little bit. So there is people in there than the first night that chose not to evacuate per our mandatory evacuation orders. Those people are not barricaded in there. They're not at immediate risk. What happens is in Colorado, they chose not to evacuate. And so they're within our fire perimeter within the inside. And so they're providing information to people on the inside to the outside. They're moving around, checking other people's houses for us. And that's actually causing more problems than not because our people can't work in the field with all of these other people on the inside moving around as well. And so it's not that people are trapped. It's not that people are in immediate risk. It's that they've chosen to stay within our perimeters. And so we're working around with those as we come up with our strategy moving forward.
When you say because they're in Colorado, do you mean because that's Colorado law that you don't have to evacuate? Is that why you mentioned it that way?
So as the sheriff, I issue a mandatory evacuation order for the residents. And then what our deputies do is we try to make face-to-face contact with each one of those people. And then if they choose not to leave their residence, then we document that information internally. And that way our responders know where they're at in case the fire does come through certain areas.
But you can't enforce that.
Correct. We cannot enforce that. And then what ends up happening, though, is a lot of these people that are now inside of our perimeters start wandering around through these neighborhoods. And so they're taking pictures of houses that could potentially be damaged, which is just basically increasing that rumor mill. And it doesn't allow me that opportunity to tell these homeowners they're finding about a third, fourth, fifth hand on Facebook or other social media aspects. And so I'm asking those people not to do that because that's their interpretation of different things. We really need to get in there and get the official word out. And we're relying on people to actually follow that official word rather than these insight kind of informal communication channels.
Can you elaborate more on the people who are unaccounted for, and how's that list grown?
That list is not grown, and I cannot elaborate any more on that.
5 people unaccounted for.
That has been an up and down list of 5 people. I use the example, it happens a lot, is that someone calls our dispatch center, reports that a person is missing. A couple hours later, we get a call, or our investigators work on it, and they find people. You know, not that person's been harmed or anything like that. They're just at a different family member's house. They're at a different evacuation center. And so this is not people that are truly missing. That's what that list is. I almost refer to it more of as an accountability list rather than a missing persons list. And that list changes. But we're not talking massive numbers in there at all. One's in there, and we're able to work through those on a case-by-case basis.
So you wouldn't say you're actively looking for people who are missing?
Correct.
I know you don't have all of the information as far as damage assessments go. Are you able to release any information about some impacted neighborhoods? Are you able to speak definitively about any of the areas kind of within that fire map?
So at this point, we're not prepared to do that. I'm going to rely on very accurate information. That needs to happen. I've spent many hours in the middle of the night driving through those neighborhoods, and it's tough to figure out. We have a lot of county roads. A lot of those are impassable at this point with trees, other things across the road. I don't want to do that until we're prepared to do that as a whole.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. Can you talk about the engagement with some of those people who have decided not to leave? Are your deputies talking to them? Are they trying to encourage them to go? Like what happens to them?
So our deputies' message in the field is if they can get out of the area, that's less people that we need to worry about as fire continues to move through different areas of the interior there. And so the quicker that we can get those people out of there, the quicker our crews can actually get in there and assess things. The fire crews can continue to work. It's become a big problem. There's a lot of people still within that area, and we're talking, 10-mile stretch of highway and then several miles on both sides. It's a large area to control, and that is taking a lot of my local resources right now and able to control that. And I wish that those people would adhere to our advice, and that way if they move out of this closure area, it allows my crews to actually get in there and get more things happening.
Is there any law that would prevent your deputies from going and say you're impeding a firefighting effort?
So that's a difficult question. As long as they're staying within their house, then they're able to remain in their house. As they start cruising around through the closure areas on a case-by-case basis, we're working with those people and getting them back out of the evacuation zones.
So you cannot force an evacuation?
No, it's a mandatory evacuation by wording, but if they choose not to leave, they don't have to. Any other questions? Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And I'll bring Kate up if there's any additional questions that you have for Kate.
I have one more, and this might be for Kate and for Brett. On Wednesday night, I saw a police officer from Empire who was directing traffic at US 34 and Highway 40. And I was just wondering if you guys could speak to the mutual aid effort and everyone who came to Grand County's aid over the last 2 or 3 days.
I'm going to let the sheriff answer the question about traffic control, and then I'll talk about some of the other resources we're getting in.
All right, Eli had a question in regards to our partner agencies, Empire PD and stuff helping us. So that first night when this call came out for help, we relied and tasked a lot of our local fire departments, police department, EMS, search and rescue with help. And then we reached out to our partner agencies in these additional cities and states surrounding us who we have great partnerships with. And so several counties sent us help. You'll see several of our traffic control points are still staffed by outside agencies. And they basically take over a lot of those roles for us so that our deputies can focus their efforts on the investigation. I can devote some staff to these damage assessment teams, and our staff can actually get some breaks as well, which is super important in long-term incidents like this.
So just as far as the other resources that we have flowing in for evacuees, we are getting a lot of cooperation with other agencies. You know, when we have needs, a lot of those are getting coordinated through the state. So just like is happening with traffic control, if we need to support at any of the sheltering locations, or for example, I have someone here from the town of Lake City helping out. And so, you know, they send out the word that we need help on communications, and then we deploy people from all over to really come in and help us out. So that's been very helpful in responding to this in our community. So, any other questions?
Any additional questions for Kate?
Thank you.
Okay, at this time I'd like to thank you for coming and for sharing the information. You're a force amplifier for us for getting information out to the community. We appreciate that. We will also be doing our Facebook Live today at 5:30 on the East Troublesome Facebook page. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Mike, I'm Charlie.
Mike Johnson, nice to meet you.
Yeah, I'm with the New York Times.